A rescue dog snapped its leash at a crowded adoption fair. Chaos erupted, and sneers cut through the air. Hollywood only knows how to pose. But as fear spread, Keanu Reeves stepped forward, knelt in the grass, and whispered calmly. What happened next silenced everyone and left the entire park in tears. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The late morning sun washed over the wide expanse of Griffith Park in Los Angeles, turning the open field into a vibrant stage of sound, color, and life. Bright banners stretched across tents, each one marked with the name of a rescue group or local shelter. Families moved between rows of stalls, children tugging on their parents' hands as dogs barked and wagged behind fences. It was the annual pet adoption fair, an event designed to match homeless animals with homes that might finally give them the love they deserved. The atmosphere was both cheerful and heavy. On one side, clusters of kids squealed with delight as they petted puppies wriggling in their arms. On the other, certain pens were quieter, housing older dogs whose eyes carried the weight of years. Some wagged nervously, some lay still with their chins pressed to the floor, as if uncertain whether anyone would even glance their way. The fair promised joy, but it also held a shadow of reality. Not every animal here would be chosen. In the middle of the crowd, Keanu Reeves slipped in without announcement or fanfare. He wore a plain gray t-shirt, dark jeans, and a baseball cap that shaded most of his face. He wasn't there to draw cameras or to sign autographs. He had heard about the adoption event through a friend who volunteered at one of the shelters and wanted simply to show support. Moving quietly between booths, he blended in with the crowd, offering polite nods and soft smiles as people passed. The volunteers, wearing bright shirts that marked their shelter's name, moved with hopeful energy. They handed out flyers, answered questions, and cheered whenever a family filled out paperwork. For them, every signature on a form meant another life saved. Still, the undertone of urgency lingered. Each cage carried more than a barking dog. It carried a story of abandonment, struggle, or loss. Children darted in and out, clutching balloons shaped like paw prints. Some begged their parents for a puppy. Others shyly approached dogs with tentative hands. The air was alive with laughter, barking, and the calls of food vendors selling hot dogs and lemonade to the growing crowd. It was a scene of celebration, yet beneath it all was a quiet reminder of America's overflowing shelters and the countless pets still waiting for homes that might never come. Keanu stopped at one pen holding a small terrier mix with scruffy fur and bright eyes. The dog leapt up against the bars, tail wagging furiously. Keanu bent down, smiling softly, his hand hovering just close enough for the dog to sniff. For a moment, he looked like any other visitor, just another man considering the possibility of adoption. But his calm presence carried a weight the dog seemed to sense. The terrier barked once, then sat, still wagging, as if waiting for a signal. Nearby, a group of teenage volunteers wrestled with a larger crate, trying to coax out a Labrador who refused to budge. The laughter of the kids around them softened into murmurs. Not every dog here was ready for joy. Some carried wounds too deep to heal overnight. And somewhere, toward the far corner of the fair, a restless pen rattled violently against its frame as a powerful dog paced back and forth, snarling and throwing its weight against the bars. People gave that area a wide berth, shaking their heads as if to say that some animals simply couldn't be saved. Keanu's eyes flicked in that direction briefly, but he didn't approach. Not yet. Instead, he moved to the next stall, leaning down to stroke another timid dog's paw through the bars. He didn't speak, didn't draw attention, but his presence alone seemed to soften the edges of the chaos around him. The event had only just begun, but the stage was already set for something no one there would ever forget. The fairground grew louder as more families arrived, parking lots filling with minivans and SUVs. Vendors called out deals on treats and toys, their tables piled high with chew ropes, leashes, and colorful collars. A brass band played upbeat music near the park's fountain, giving the day a festive rhythm, but beneath that cheerfulness ran a current of unease. Not every booth sparkled with hope. Toward the shaded edge of the park, volunteers huddled near the pen that rattled earlier. Inside was Max, a shepherd mix with thick black and tan fur, his body scarred from years on the street. He paced relentlessly, nails scraping against the metal floor, eyes wild and distrusting. Every time someone approached, he lunged at the bars with a guttural growl that made parents pull children away in alarm. His reputation preceded him. No family had even filled out a form to inquire. One volunteer whispered to another, "He's been here 6 months. People keep passing by. They say he's too much trouble." Another replied grimly, "He's already on the list. If no one takes him today, the shelter might have no choice." Their words were hushed, but heavy. Keanu paused at a nearby stall and heard enough to understand. His gaze drifted to Max. The dog's tail wasn't wagging, his ears pinned back, every muscle wound tight like a coiled spring. The air around the pen felt different. Where the other dogs begged for affection, Max seemed to demand distance. A small crowd had gathered at a safe remove, whispering as they watched. Some shook their heads, others pointed at the scars on his muzzle, already writing him off as dangerous. Still, life carried on around him. Just across the path, a pair of toddlers giggled as they tumbled with a litter of soft golden retriever pups. Their mother laughed, pulling out her phone to capture the moment. The contrast was stark, the irresistible innocence of puppies versus the hardened, intimidating presence of a dog like Max. People gravitated to one side of the fair, leaving the other in shadow. Keanu moved slowly between groups, stopping now and then to speak softly to volunteers, thanking them for their work. He didn't announce who he was, though a few people recognized him. Some asked for a photo, which he gently declined, explaining, "Today is about them, not me." His humility seemed to catch people off guard. In a place where most came to adopt or donate, here was a world-famous actor quietly slipping bowls of water closer to dogs and bending low so they could feel seen. A breeze picked up, carrying the mingled scents of hot food and damp fur. The day felt both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary because it was just another Saturday in Los Angeles. Extraordinary because so many lives hung in the balance. Every laugh, every bark, every completed adoption form meant the world to a creature that might finally know love. But even amid the optimism, Max's pen stood as a reminder that not every story had a happy ending. As the sun climbed higher, the fair reached its peak. Cars lined the streets, and the sound of barking swelled into a chorus that echoed across the park. Adoption forms piled up at the volunteer tables. Each successful match was met with cheers, clapping, and the occasional tears of joy as a dog left its cage for the last time. Hope was alive in every corner, except one. Max's pen remained untouched. A father carrying a stroller glanced in that direction, shook his head and muttered, "That one looks like trouble." A young couple lingered for only a second before turning away, whispering to each other that they didn't want a problem dog. The sight of him alone in that pen stirred something uncomfortable, like an unspoken truth. People didn't want to face that compassion often has limits when fear steps in. Keanu stood a few feet away, taking in the scene. He watched how Max's body shifted with every passerby, the way his hackles rose, then settled, then rose again. It wasn't mindless aggression, it was confusion, fear, a desperate attempt to guard himself from a world that had already hurt him. Keanu recognized that look. He had seen it in people, and now he saw it in this animal. Nearby, a group of teenagers laughed as they filmed themselves for social media, aiming their phone toward Max's cage. One of them said loudly, "This one's crazy, nobody's taking him home." The others snickered, pretending to be pulled away by invisible leashes, mocking the unseen danger. Their voices carried, blending with the cheers of another family celebrating the adoption of a small, fluffy beagle. The contrast was sharp and painful. Keanu turned his gaze back to the terrier he had met earlier. The little dog pressed its nose through the bars, eyes gleaming with hope. He knelt again, giving it a reassuring pat. Yet in his periphery, the restless energy of Max's cage continued to gnaw at the edge of the moment. Volunteers whispered about moving Max farther away, even covering part of the cage so people wouldn't focus on him. Anything to keep the fair cheerful. But the fair wasn't meant to be only about joy, it was about truth. For every soft puppy, there was a scarred dog like Max. For every family ready to adopt, there were others turning away. The reality of rescue lay in those shadows. As the brass band shifted into another cheerful tune, Keanu rose to his feet and walked slowly toward the shaded corner where Max paced. People noticed, murmuring among themselves, wondering why he was going that way. He wasn't drawing attention, he moved with the same quiet presence as before. But something in his deliberate steps created a ripple in the crowd. They followed his eyes and, for the first time that day, many looked closely at Max, not with dismissal, but with curiosity. The adoption fair was alive with celebration, but an undercurrent of tension had been set. In that corner, behind the rattling pen, the story of the day was waiting to unfold. Max's pen sat in the corner like a storm contained in metal bars. His body was tense, every muscle rippling as he paced back and forth. The shepherd mix was larger than most of the dogs at the event, his thick fur streaked with tan and black, his muzzle scarred as though he had fought too many battles no one could explain. His eyes glowed with a restless fire, and every few seconds he lunged forward, hitting the gate with a force that made the latch rattle. Parents steered their children away with hurried gestures. Some kids pointed curiously, but their mothers pulled them close, whispering warnings about dangerous dogs. Even adults kept their distance, pretending not to notice as they passed by. Max's presence drew people's eyes, but not in the way that led to adoption. He was a reminder of what people feared, not what they wanted to bring into their homes. Two volunteers stood a few feet away, shaking their heads as they watched him. One said quietly, "That one's trouble. No family is going to take a chance on him." The other sighed, her face lined with exhaustion. "I hate it. He's smart. You can see it in his eyes. But nobody's going to look past the growling. They'll all walk away." Their voices were soft, but their words carried the heavy truth of shelter work. Max's growl rose again, a deep rumble that drew uncomfortable glances. He barked sharply, slamming his body into the bars. A toddler began to cry nearby, and his father quickly lifted him up, muttering under his breath about irresponsible rescues. The pen was starting to feel like a dividing line at the fair, the place where optimism ended and pity began. That was when a pair of well-dressed influencers strolled by. The man wore designer sunglasses, his shirt unbuttoned halfway to show off a gold chain. The woman clutched her phone, streaming a live video as they walked. When they reached Max's pen, the dog lunged, his teeth flashing. She shrieked theatrically, stumbling back into her partner's arms. Instead of fear, they broke into laughter. "Look at this beast," the man said loudly, making sure nearby families heard. "Who's crazy enough to take him home? He'll end up right back on the streets." His partner snickered, turning her phone toward the cage. "Guys, check this out. Totally unadoptable. Some dogs are just lost causes." Their shallow laughter rang through the air, clashing harshly against the warmth of the adoption fair. Across the way, Keanu Reeves had been kneeling by a quiet pen holding two shy beagles. He lifted his head slightly when he heard the mocking tone, his eyes moving toward Max. He didn't frown, didn't confront, but there was a shift in his expression. His gaze lingered on the restless shepherd, studying him not with ridicule, but with a deep, steady calm. Where others saw danger, he seemed to notice pain. Max's pacing grew sharper after the laughter faded. He pressed his body against the bars, eyes darting at every movement as if every passerby was a threat. His bark echoed through the space, deeper and more guttural than the smaller dogs nearby. People couldn't help glancing, then quickly turning away, carrying with them a look of judgment or fear. It was as if he carried a scarlet mark across his fur that declared him untouchable. The volunteers tried to reassure families, guiding them to the calmer pens where wagging tails and eager eyes made adoption feel safe. Yet whispers trailed behind them. Parents told children not to point at the mean dog. Couples debated in hushed tones about whether he should even be allowed in public. Max wasn't just caged by metal bars, he was caged by the assumptions people carried in their hearts. Keanu moved slowly along the line of pens, crouching at each one, greeting the animals with a gentle hand against the bars. He didn't rush. With each dog, he paused, letting them sniff, watching their reactions, offering a quiet smile before stepping to the next. At one pen, a young Labrador wagged furiously, pressing his nose against the gate. A family of 4 approached at the same time. Keanu stepped back, giving them space, but before leaving, he bent low and whispered softly to the dog, "Good boy. Show them how gentle you are." The Labrador settled instantly, sitting tall as the children reached out to pet him. The parents exchanged a look, and within minutes they were filling out forms. Keanu smiled faintly from a distance, the joy of the moment belonging not to him, but to the family and the dog. A little farther down, he crouched by a timid hound curled in the corner of its cage. Most people walked past without stopping, but Keanu lingered. He lowered his hand, not close enough to touch, but near enough that the dog could smell his presence. He stayed perfectly still, letting the dog make the choice. Slowly, the hound lifted its head, sniffed the air, then inched closer, placing its paw hesitantly against the bars. Keanu's smile widened just slightly, his patience rewarded. A volunteer watching nearby whispered, "He's never come forward for anyone before." These small acts didn't draw applause. Many in the crowd didn't even notice, but the effect rippled quietly. A nervous dog calmed. A shy one stepped forward. A family found their new companion. Keanu didn't need the spotlight. He carried his own light, the kind that animals seem to recognize instinctively. And yet, even as he worked his way along the pens, the sprecket in steps, sound of Max's frustrated growls cut through the background like thunder rolling in a summer sky. The dog's presence was impossible to ignore, and Keanu's eyes kept drifting back toward him, as if some unseen pull was drawing him closer. The influencer couple hadn't moved far. They lingered at a food stall, talking loudly enough for those nearby to hear, still mocking Max. The woman waved her phone toward him again, narrating in a syrupy voice. "Here's the psycho dog. 0 chance of adoption. Who would want that thing?" Her partner smirked and added, "Bet even the movie star over there wouldn't go near him." Their words, coated with arrogance, spread through the crowd like smoke. A few people chuckled nervously, but most turned away, uncomfortable. No one wanted to confront them, yet the damage was done. Parents pulled their kids a little closer. Volunteers exchanged weary looks, and Max's growls deepened as if he understood the contempt. His body slammed against the bars once more, rattling the pens so hard that a child screamed and burst into tears. The laughter from the couple rang louder than the music playing in the background. Keanu didn't react outwardly, though his eyes tracked every detail. He wasn't a man who thrived on confrontation, but he had a way of making silence louder than noise. As the couple continued their mockery, he shifted back toward the calmer dogs, his movements steady and deliberate, almost as if to show the opposite of what they mocked. At one pen, a small shepherd mix wagged shyly. Keanu knelt, stroked its paw through the bars, and spoke gently, his words low enough that only the dog and nearby volunteer could hear. The animal relaxed, tail thumping against the floor. A young boy who had been too nervous to approach earlier stepped closer, encouraged by Keanu's calm presence. Within minutes, the boy was stroking the dog's head, giggling with relief. His parents watched with surprise, their fear melting as they saw how gentle the moment became. Across the aisle, Max snarled again, but Keanu didn't look at him just yet. He stayed focused on the animals in front of him, giving each one the dignity of attention. His compassion wasn't selective. He didn't just stop for the cute or easy ones. He lingered for the overlooked, the timid, the elderly. Every dog mattered. The crowd began to notice. Whispers moved through the fair. "That's Keanu Reeves." Some reached for phones, hoping to capture a picture, but he waved them off politely, explaining to one fan who approached, "Not today. Today is about them." His tone was warm but firm, and even the most eager fans respected the boundary. Still, the murmurs carried. Some people laughed at the influencer's cruelty, but others now contrasted it with Keanu's quiet grace. While the couple turned a living creature into a punchline, he offered each one his patience. And though he hadn't yet approached Max, there was a sense that he would. His eyes kept drifting to the restless cage, his expression unreadable, as if he were waiting for the right moment. The fair was alive with energy, filled with balloons, music, and the shouts of volunteers celebrating every adoption. But beneath the cheer, a tension simmered. Everyone could feel it, even if they didn't say it aloud. Max's cage was more than a pen. It was a question hanging in the air, one that no one seemed willing to answer except perhaps the quiet man who had been watching all along. The fair had reached its noisiest moment when the sound came an ugly, metallic snap that split the air like a gunshot. Heads turned instantly. Max had hurled himself against the side of the pen with all his weight, and this time the latch didn't hold. The chain strained, bent, and then broke apart. In one violent motion, he was free. Chaos erupted. Families screamed, scattering in all directions. A vendor dropped a tray of sodas, cans fizzing and rolling across the grass as people stumbled over them in panic. Children cried, their parents scooping them up as they rushed toward the safety of the park's exit. The brass band stopped mid-song, the silence replaced by frantic shouts. Max bolted through the crowd, his muscles coiled and powerful, his fur bristling like an animal cornered. He wasn't chasing anyone, but his wild, fearful snarls painted a picture of danger that sent everyone reeling back. His nails tore through the dirt as he lunged one way, then another, eyes wide and desperate, trying to escape the tightening circle of people around him. The volunteers froze. Some held catch poles in trembling hands, but none dared to step forward. Their fear wasn't unreasonable. A dog in panic could bite, and Max looked every bit the beast people whispered he was. Parents clutched children. Teenagers ran to higher ground on picnic tables, and the once cheerful park became a scene of chaos. Near the food stall, the influencer couple raised their phones higher, delighted at the spectacle. The woman gasped dramatically into her live stream.
"Oh my God, he's loose! Total disaster!"
The man sneered, his voice cutting through the noise. "See? This is what happens. You can't fix a dog like that. Dangerous. Hopeless." His words carried, feeding the crowd's rising fear. Max spun in circles, trapped by the screaming and movement. Every sound seemed to push him deeper into panic. He lunged at a stroller left behind in the chaos, his teeth sinking into the panic. Fabric, ripping it apart as if it were prey. A mother sobbed as a volunteer rushed to pull the stroller away. Gasps and shrieks rose higher, feeding the frenzy. And then, through the storm of noise, one figure moved differently. Keanu Reeves stepped forward from the line of pens, his pace slow, steady, deliberate. He didn't raise his arms, didn't shout commands. His body was calm, his breathing even. Where others surged backward, he eased into the open space Max had carved out. People noticed. "What's he doing?" someone cried. "He's going to get hurt," another muttered bitterly. Hollywood stars think they can play hero. The influencer man laughed loud enough for his live stream audience to hear. Watch him fail. This isn't a movie. But Keanu kept moving forward, lowering his shoulders, his steps careful and measured. Max's frantic eyes caught him immediately, locking onto this new figure in the chaos. The shepherd froze for a second, hackles raised, chest heaving, as if deciding whether this man was another threat or something else. The crowd pressed back in a wide circle, fear drawing them away, while curiosity held them near enough to watch. Children clung to their parents, eyes wide and wet with tears. Volunteers exchanged panicked glances but still hesitated, their tools useless in trembling hands. The silence of uncertainty spread, broken only by Max's low, frantic growls. Keanu's pace never changed. Each step was unhurried, deliberate, as though he carried no fear at all. His arms hung loosely by his sides, palms open, showing the dog he had nothing to hide. He kept his body lowered slightly, bending his knees, avoiding eye contact long enough to signal he wasn't a threat. Everything about him radiated calm. Max's chest heaved as he panted, eyes darting from the crowd to Keanu. His claws dug trenches into the grass, his body coiled as if ready to strike. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might launch forward. Mothers gasped, pulling their children tighter, a wave of tension rippling through the circle. But instead of lunging, Max let out a deep warning bark that shook the air. The influencer's voice cut through the moment. "Look at this. He's insane to try this. Somebody get him out of there before he gets mauled." His partner held her phone high, narrating into the live stream like a commentator at a gladiator match. Their laughter was sharp, feeding the nerves of those who already doubted. Keanu ignored them completely. His focus never left the animal. He lowered himself further, one knee brushing the dirt, his shoulders rounded, his head tilted just slightly down. His breath slowed deliberately, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Every part of him seemed designed to send one message: "I'm not here to hurt you." Max's growls faltered, uncertain now. He circled in quick, jittery movements, eyes flicking between the circle of onlookers, and the quiet man crouched before him. The crowd held its collective breath, afraid to move, afraid even to whisper. Then a child's balloon popped somewhere near the fountain, the sharp crack slicing through the silence. Max startled violently, teeth bared, his body lunging toward the sound. Screams rose again, and people surged back, knocking over chairs and spilling drinks. The chaos threatened to undo every fragile moment of calm. But Keanu did not flinch. Instead, he slowly shifted lower, sitting fully on the ground now, legs crossed, hands resting on his knees. His calmness was so stark against the storm around him that even the crowd fell into an uneasy hush, watching to see what would happen next. Max turned back, panting hard, ears flattened. His eyes locked onto Keanu again, confused, caught between fight and curiosity. The growl in his throat softened into a whine, a small, hesitant sound that cut through the tension like a plea no one expected. The crowd's energy hovered between panic and silence, every pair of eyes fixed on the strange standoff unfolding in the middle of the park. Max stood rigid, muscles quivering, his body prepared to explode in any direction. Yet something about the man sitting calmly on the grass unsettled his instincts. Instead of charging, he circled, keeping a tense distance. Keanu slowly raised one hand, palm open, his movement measured and unthreatening. He didn't reach for the dog, didn't try to command him. He simply let the hand hover in the space between them. His breathing remained steady, the kind of rhythm one might use in meditation, every exhale longer than the last. Max tilted his head, confused. His ears twitched at the sound of Keanu's breath, at the absence of shouting or fear. The snarls faded into uncertain huffs, and his tail, once stiff and high, lowered ever so slightly. He barked once, sharp and defensive, but he didn't advance. The influencer broke the fragile quiet with another sneer. "This is pathetic. He thinks he can sit there and magically fix him? Just wait, this is going to end in blood." His partner laughed, pushing her phone closer to capture every second. A few people hissed at them to be quiet, but the tension was already cracking. Keanu still didn't react. His gaze softened, his posture loose and grounded, as if he were a tree rooted to the earth. He spoke finally, but so quietly that only those closest could hear. A single word, calm and low, repeated slowly, like a gentle chant. It wasn't a command, it was reassurance. Max's pacing slowed. He edged a step closer, his nails scraping the grass, eyes flicking warily between Keanu and the crowd. Another step, then a pause, head low, body quivering with uncertainty. The circle of people instinctively leaned back, making the space feel less confined. The shepherd sensed it, the pressure easing from his shoulders. A volunteer whispered, trembling, "I've never seen him like this." Another muttered, "It's impossible. He was always too far, gone." But no one dared to move closer. Max stopped just a few feet away. His chest rose and fell in quick bursts, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. Keanu's hand remained steady, palm up, unwavering. For a long moment, nothing moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Max let out a low whine, a sound that carried the weight of fear more than aggression. His head dipped slightly, ears tilting forward, curiosity battling instinct. He didn't lunge, didn't turn away. He stayed. The crowd exhaled all at once, a wave of relief breaking through the tension. Children peeked from behind their parents. Volunteers lowered their poles slowly. The influencer couple fell silent, their smug grins flickering with unease. Keanu hadn't touched the dog, hadn't forced anything. He had only waited, breathing calm into chaos. And in that stillness, something impossible had begun, a fragile thread of trust, woven in the most unlikely of moments. Keanu eased himself lower into the grass, his movements fluid and unthreatening. His knees bent, his weight settling onto the earth until he was nearly eye level with Max. His hands opened wide, palms facing up, fingers relaxed, showing emptiness, showing peace. The dog's growl sharpened instantly, a guttural warning, his lips curling back to reveal sharp white teeth. But Keanu did not flinch. He lowered his gaze slightly, not enough to break the connection, but just enough to signal respect. His breathing slowed into deep, deliberate waves, chest rising and falling like steady tides. Each inhale was quiet, each exhale long and calm. His shoulders dropped, his frame softened, his body language stripped of all tension. To the panicked shepherd circling before him, there was nothing threatening in the man's posture. Max's teeth flashed, saliva catching the sunlight as he snapped once in the air. The crowd flinched, a collective gasp rippling around the circle. A few screamed, ready for violence. But Keanu stayed, motionless, his eyes steady, his body still anchored low to the ground. The silence inside his own mind was something he had practiced for decades. Years of martial arts training had taught him that a fight wasn't only about speed or strength. It was about energy. It was about control. He had learned how to steady his heart when fear pressed against his chest, how to quiet the noise of panic and replace it with balance. Now, in the middle of a park, surrounded by chaos, those lessons mattered more than ever. He whispered softly, barely audible even to those closest. A single word, a murmur, carried on his breath. The tone wasn't commanding. It was soothing, almost like a hum, each repetition designed to shape rhythm and familiarity. Max stiffened, ears pricked at the sound. He growled again, but there was hesitation behind the noise. The crowd held still. Phones hovered in the air, screens recording. Some were trembling too much to capture a steady image. Parents shielded children's eyes. Others muttered prayers under their breath. The influencer couple narrated with smug certainty, insisting the man was seconds from disaster. But in the tight circle where fear reigned, the only two who truly mattered were locked on each other. One man breathing peace, one dog trembling between fight and surrender. Keanu's voice remained steady, his palms still open, his breath an anchor in the storm. And though Max snarled again, his paws stopped pacing. For the first time since breaking free, he froze, eyes locked not on the crowd, not on the chaos, but on the calm figure kneeling in the grass before him. The air around them thickened with suspense, as though the entire park had stopped breathing. Max's chest heaved, his growl vibrating through the ground, but his paws no longer shuffled in restless circles. He stood fixed, staring at the man kneeling calmly before him. His body trembled with energy that had nowhere to go, torn between attack and surrender. Keanu stayed, perfectly still, his eyes soft but steady. Inside, memories stirred, uninvited, yet fitting. He was 12 again, wandering through back alleys of Toronto after school. Stray dogs lingered there, mangy and thin, their ribs visible under patchy fur. Some snarled when approached, some whimpered with tails tucked. He remembered crouching low in those alleys, whispering to them with the same calm tone he used now. He had wanted to ease their fear, even then, though he couldn't take them home. His childhood was unsettled, money scarce, and the best he could offer was presence. Still, some of the strays would inch closer, daring to believe in a boy's gentleness. That memory sat heavy in his chest as he looked at Max. Years had passed, roles had changed, but the principle was the same. Broken souls, human or animal, needed more than force. They needed space, patience, and the chance to feel safe again. Max's snarl deepened suddenly, snapping Keanu back to the present. The shepherd lunged forward just a foot, teeth flashing. The crowd screamed, several volunteers starting toward the scene before stopping short, but Keanu didn't move. His hands stayed open, palms still, voice low and calm. The lunge halted inches from his space. Max's bark exploded into the air. But it wasn't met with aggression. It was met with silence, met with stillness. The pause that followed was longer than anyone expected. Max blinked, his ears flicking uncertainly. His teeth remained bared, yet his body wavered as though unsure what he was fighting. The rhythm of Keanu's breath filled the space between them, steady, unbroken. The dog's eyes narrowed, then widened again, his chest pounding against his ribs. The people closest held their breath. A woman whispered to her husband, "Why isn't he moving?" "He should get away," the man replied, voice shaking. "He's waiting for the dog to make the choice." Their words carried the weight of awe and fear, echoing thoughts the entire crowd shared. Max paced a half circle, keeping his distance, but his steps were slower now. He huffed through his nose, his growls softening into short bursts. The energy was still fierce, but the wild panic that fueled him minutes earlier was giving way to confusion. He didn't understand why the man didn't fight, why he didn't run, why he simply breathed calmly in the middle of chaos. Keanu leaned slightly forward, his voice low again, barely more than a murmur. A gentle word, a quiet plea. Not to control, but to invite. Max's ears twitched, catching the sound, and he paused mid-step, his tail lowering just a fraction. The world seemed to shrink, until it was just two figures in the grass, one man and one dog, both frozen in a fragile balance. Max's chest heaved, his ribs expanding with every sharp breath. But his paws no longer struck the ground with panic. His eyes stayed fixed on Keanu, confused, unsettled, yet drawn in. Keanu stayed rooted, his body low and calm, as if he were part of the earth itself. He whispered another word, quiet and steady, letting the sound float rather than press. His hand remained out, not reaching, not demanding, only offering. The tone was patient, and its patience carried weight. Max whined again, a high-pitched sound that contrasted harshly against his earlier barks. His ears tilted forward, his lips still curled but no longer pulled all the way back. He shifted his weight from paw to paw, a restless energy now mixed with hesitation. The crowd leaned forward unconsciously, drawn into the spell. Even the influencers had gone quiet, their phones still rolling but their mocking grins fading. Then, as though the memory of something gentler broke through the chaos, Max took a small step forward. His nails scraped against the dirt, his head lowered, his eyes darting nervously between Keanu and the crowd. The circle widened instinctively, giving him space. And for the first time since the breakout, Max didn't lunge, he moved closer. The hush that fell over the fair was profound. A baby cried somewhere near the food stalls, but even that sound seemed muted beneath the collective anticipation. Keanu did not celebrate. He did not smile. He stayed perfectly steady, honoring the fragile trust with silence. His breathing kept its rhythm, chest rising, falling, rising, falling. Max stopped just a few feet away, his body trembling, his tail low but not tucked. He growled once more, softer this time, as if testing whether he still needed the armor of fear. Keanu whispered again, the same quiet word, his voice like water smoothing stone. For a long moment, nothing else mattered. Not the filming phones, not the whispered doubts, not the tension of hundreds of people holding their breath. It was only the shepherd and the man, kneeling in the grass, staring into each other's eyes. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Max's growl faded. His mouth closed. His breathing slowed to match the rhythm before him. The crowd exhaled, a wave of relief and disbelief rolling through the park. Some clapped softly, others covered their mouths, tears welling at the sight of a wild creature beginning to trust. No miracle had fully happened yet, but something inside the storm had shifted. Max had not surrendered. Keanu had not triumphed, but they had reached the first fragile pause, the first crack in the wall of fear. And in that pause, the possibility of change was born. The fragile silence stretched between them, a thin thread that could snap at any second. Keanu stayed grounded in the grass, his posture unchanged, his breathing steady. Max hovered a few feet away, panting, his eyes restless but no longer blazing with the same feral panic. His muscles quivered, a storm still waiting to break. But there was hesitation now, a question forming behind his snarls. Slowly, with a movement so deliberate the crowd could barely see it, Keanu reached into the pocket of his jeans. His hand moved carefully, no sudden gestures, no rush. He pulled out a small treat, a biscuit that had been tucked away earlier by a volunteer when the fair began. Holding it between his fingers, he lowered his hand until it rested near the ground, palm open, the treat visible in his open hand. He did not extend it forward. He did not try to lure the dog closer. He simply let it rest there, in the space between them, his body language broadcasting patience rather than demand. His eyes softened, his lips barely moving as he whispered the same quiet word he had been repeating before. A rhythm, a reassurance. Max's nose twitched immediately. Hunger battled fear, clawing its way into the shepherd's mind. His stomach growled audibly, loud enough that a few people near the front of the circle exchanged surprised glances. The scars on his muzzle told of hardship, of days where survival meant taking whatever scraps he could. And now, here it was something familiar, something tempting, yet it came from the very hand of the man he still wasn't sure he could trust. He paced in short bursts, circling half a step one way, then jolting back, his claws ripping into the grass. His eyes darted to the treat, then back to Keanu, then to the crowd that still loomed at the edges. Each time the people gasped or shifted, his body stiffened again. The murmurs began. "He's doing nothing," someone muttered. Another added, "That's not training, that's just sitting there." A third voice whispered with skepticism, "That dog is never going to take it." Doubt swirled as the crowd wrestled between awe and impatience, their nerves stretched thin by the sight of the tense animal so close to the calm man. Keanu ignored the whispers completely. His hand stayed where it was, unmoving, offering without forcing. He remained anchored, repeating the soft word again and again, like a stone that let water run around it. His breathing never faltered. His patience was the lesson. Max edged closer, inch by inch, his paws dragging hesitantly, his head dipped, nostrils flaring as the scent of the treat filled his senses. He let out a sharp bark, startling some of the children, then snapped at the air as if testing the space. Still, the treat remained where it was, untouched, waiting. The shepherd growled again, but it was softer now, almost conflicted. He stepped forward once, then back, then forward again. The tension in his body warred with the hunger, twisting his belly. Finally, with a burst of speed, he darted forward, snatched the treat from the ground and leapt back instantly, chewing frantically while never breaking his gaze from the man before him. The sound of crunching filled the tense air as Max chewed, his body hunched low, ready to spring back if the moment turned against him. His eyes never left Keanu's face. Every movement of his jaw was fast and desperate, the act of an animal who wasn't used to food coming without a fight. Gasps rose around the circle. Parents whispered to their children. Volunteers exchanged wide-eyed looks. A man near the front muttered, "He actually took it." Another voice chimed in with disbelief. "No one's ever gotten that close to him." The ripple of surprise carried through the crowd, breaking the silence with murmurs of awe and doubt tangled together. Keanu didn't move to celebrate. He didn't reach out or lean forward. He let Max have the space he needed, keeping his posture low and unthreatening. The treat was gone, but the offering wasn't about food. It was about trust. It was about proving that nothing bad would follow. His hand remained still, palm open, showing emptiness again. Max finished chewing, his tongue darting out to lick his muzzle. He huffed through his nose, pacing 2 short steps to the side, then back, his body restless with uncertainty. Hunger had pulled him forward once, but fear still chained his instincts. He barked again, sharp and loud, as if reminding everyone that he wasn't tame yet. Children flinched, and the circle pressed back again. Keanu whispered softly, repeating the word, his tone even gentler now. It was steady, almost like a heartbeat that didn't change no matter how loud the world became. He leaned slightly, placing another small treat on the ground, then drew his hand back slowly to his lap. The motion was deliberate, no rush, no threat. Max's ears flicked forward. His eyes darted to the new offering, then to Keanu, then back again. He whined, a low, drawn-out sound that cracked through the layers of aggression. The crowd leaned closer unconsciously, pulled into the fragile dance. Someone whispered, "Come on, boy," and another muttered skeptically, "It won't happen twice." But Keanu didn't rush him. He stayed as still as stone, breathing, waiting, whispering. His patience seemed endless. Max circled, nose twitching, body low to the ground. He edged closer again, each step a battle between instinct and need. His claws dug shallow tracks into the grass as he crawled within reach of the second treat. Another bark burst from him, a warning, but softer than before. Then, with a cautious dart, he snatched the second treat and jumped back a shorter distance this time, chewing while watching. His tail twitched, not wagging, but no longer rigid. His body trembled, but something in his stance had shifted just slightly, but enough for anyone watching closely to see. Murmurs spread. He's calming down. Look at him. He didn't run as far this time. Is he trusting him? The disbelief in their voices gave way to cautious hope. The moment hadn't broken yet. It was only beginning. Max licked the last crumbs from his muzzle, his tongue darting nervously as though savoring the taste but fearing the price. His body still trembled, but the distance he had put between himself and Keanu was smaller now. The crowd noticed. They whispered in disbelief, their voices hushed, almost reverent. For the first time since the chaos began, hope flickered in the air. Keanu lowered his hand again, resting it palm up on the grass, this time without a treat. He whispered the same soft word, letting it ride the rhythm of his breath. He wasn't offering food anymore. He was offering presence. The repetition built a pattern, a signal without force, an invitation without pressure. Max's ears twitched. He paced back and forth, circling tighter, his eyes darting from Keanu's hand to his face, then to the crowd. Each time someone in the audience shifted, his body stiffened, but Keanu's calmness pulled him back. The shepherd whined, uncertain, a sound carrying both fear and longing. A man in the crowd scoffed. He's not doing anything, just sitting there. Another whispered back, look closer, he is doing something. He's waiting. Their hushed argument reflected the divide in the onlookers. Some believed nothing was happening. Others saw the miracle already forming. Max stepped forward again. This time, his movements weren't as frantic. He inched closer, nose lowered, sniffing the ground near Keanu's hand. His growl rumbled once, fading as quickly as it came. The crowd leaned in, hearts pounding. Keanu didn't flinch, didn't move his hand, didn't even shift his weight. Max sniffed once, twice, then pressed his nose against Keanu's open palm. The contact was brief, a single moment of courage before he pulled back. Again, but it was enough. Gasps erupted from the circle, a few people clapping before others hushed them quickly. The air vibrated with awe. Keanu whispered again, his voice carrying gratitude, not command. His eyes softened further, his breath steady. The shepherd's tail flicked, not wagging fully, but a subtle sign of the storm beginning to break. Max circled once more, but slower, less tense. His body eased just slightly, his head dipping lower as though acknowledging the man's patience. For the first time, the aggression wasn't leading. Fear was no longer the only voice inside him. Hunger and curiosity had cracked the wall, and now trust was pushing through. It was fragile, delicate, and could shatter in an instant. But it was there. The crowd's silence deepened. Phones trembled in hands that had been ready for disaster, but were now recording the beginnings of something extraordinary. No one dared breathe too loudly. Children peered from behind parents' legs, wide-eyed, as though watching magic unfold. Keanu's hand stayed open, his body rooted in stillness. The first signal had been given, and it had been answered. The storm inside Max was shifting, little by little, towards something no one thought possible. The hush that had fallen over the park did not silence everyone. From the cluster of volunteers near the edge, a young man shook his head, his voice low but sharp enough to carry. "It won't work," he muttered. "That dog's unfixable. We've tried everything." His words spread quickly, feeding the fear already woven into the crowd. A few nodded in agreement, relief sparking at the thought that their doubt was justified. The influencer seized the moment, raising his phone higher so his live stream audience wouldn't miss a second. He sneered, his tone dripping with arrogance. "You see this? This is nothing but a show. He's not taming anything. He's just sitting there pretending to be some dog whisperer. Watch, he'll fail. He'll get bit, and everyone will say they warned him." His partner laughed, leaning against his shoulder, playing to the camera with a theatrical gasp. The crowd wavered. Parents shifted uneasily, pulling their children back another step. A mother whispered urgently, "We shouldn't even be standing this close." Her husband tightened his grip on their son's hand, ready to drag him away if the shepherd lunged again. Fear worked its way through the people like a current, rippling outward, making the circle wider. And yet, not everyone pulled away. Some leaned forward, captivated. Their eyes weren't fixed on the danger, they were watching the shift that had already begun. They had seen the treats taken, the growls soften, the brief contact of Max's nose against Keanu's open palm. For them, it wasn't about disaster anymore. It was about possibility. A man near the front whispered to his wife, "Did you see?" He sniffed his hand. He didn't snap, he actually sniffed. She nodded, eyes wide, clutching her daughter's shoulders. "I think he's trying. I think that dog is trying." Keanu's calm didn't falter. He stayed rooted in the grass, his body steady as stone but warm as sunlight. His hand lowered again, this time not empty. Another treat lay balanced between his fingers. He did not wave it. He did not lure. He simply slid it forward across the ground, with a slow motion, leaving it halfway between them. Then he drew his hand back again, resting it on his knee. His breathing kept its rhythm, every inhale and exhale steady enough to be seen from the edge of the circle. Max's head twitched at the sight, his ears pricked, nostrils flaring, eyes darting to the offering. He whined low in his throat, then barked once, testing the air. The crowd flinched, but Keanu didn't so much as blink. His gaze softened further, his shoulders low, his voice repeating that same quiet word. Max paced, restless, every muscle in conflict. Hunger tugged him forward. Fear yanked him back. He circled tight, then froze, staring at the treat. His growl returned, shorter now, less of a roar and more of a grumble. Then, with slow, halting steps, he edged closer. The circle gasped as one. The shepherd stopped just shy of the treat, his body crouched low. He glanced once at the crowd, then back at Keanu. And then, in a moment no one expected, he lowered his haunches, sitting down, tentative and trembling, but sitting nonetheless. The park fell silent. The impossible had just begun. The sight of Max sitting sent a shock through the crowd, like a wave no one expected. Some gasped loudly, hands flying to their mouths. Others whispered in awe, their disbelief breaking into murmurs that sounded more like reverence than doubt. For those who had seen the shepherd only as a beast, the image of him seated, even if tense and trembling, was almost too much to process. Yet even with the moment unfolding before them, skepticism clung stubbornly. The young volunteer who had muttered earlier shook his head again, though his voice had lost some of its conviction. "It doesn't mean anything," he insisted to the woman beside him. "He's just tired. He'll snap any second." The woman didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on Max, her lips pressed tight, as if she didn't dare disturb what was happening. The influencer wouldn't let the silence hold. He turned his phone to capture the dog sitting, smirking at his audience. "Oh, wow. Everyone's losing their minds, because the monster sat down. Big deal. This is nothing. Don't blink. He's going to explode again." His partner laughed too loudly, though the forced sound drew a few sharp looks from people nearby who no longer found them amusing. In the inner circle, the parents who had pulled their children back earlier now hesitated. One father leaned down to his son and whispered, "Did you see that? Saturday? The dog, actually Saturday." The boy's eyes were wide, his fear softening into wonder. "Does that mean he's good now?" the child asked. The father swallowed hard before replying, "Not yet, buddy, but maybe he wants to be." Keanu's calm remained unbroken. He didn't react to the gasps, the whispers, or the scorn. His eyes stayed on Max, his body steady, his voice soft. He repeated the word again, the gentle rhythm now tied to the shepherd's stillness. His hand didn't move, but his presence spoke louder than gestures ever could. Max shifted, his body taut as a drawn bow, but he didn't rise. His tail flicked once, then again, uncertain. His ears tilted back, then forward, as if fighting themselves. He glanced at the treat on the ground, the scent filling his nose, and whined softly. Hunger gnawed at him, fear holding him captive, but the weight of patience pressing down from the man before him was undeniable. Slowly, Max leaned forward, his body low, his chest brushing the dirt as he crawled toward the treat. His growl was still there, but muted, muffled, as though even he no longer believed in its strength. His nose touched the biscuit, and after a pause that seemed to last forever, he snapped it up with a quick motion, then sat again, chewing furiously. His eyes never leaving Keanu. Gasps rose once more, louder this time. A woman whispered. He came back to sitting, on his own. Another voice answered, trembling, "That's not Chance. He's listening. He's learning." And through it all, Keanu stayed grounded, as calm as the earth itself. The energy of the park shifted, the tension bending under the weight of something no one could deny anymore. Max had sat again, not once, but twice. And though his body trembled with unease, it was a gesture of choice rather than accident. The crowd recognized it, even if they didn't know how to put it into words. For some, doubt still clung stubbornly. A volunteer near the back whispered, "It won't last. He'll flip the second someone moves too fast." A mother held her daughter closer, muttering, "I don't want her anywhere near that dog, no matter what." Fear had sunk deep, and trust would take more than one miracle to heal. But others leaned closer now, not with recklessness, but with hope. They wanted to see what came next. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders so they could witness the impossible. Couples held hands tighter, whispering about how they had never seen anything like it. Even strangers who had never spoken before turned to one another, united in awe. The influencer tried one last time to mock the moment. "It's all an act. Don't fall for it," he sneered into his phone. But his voice rang hollow now, stripped of its confidence. His audience of onlookers wasn't laughing anymore. They were staring past him, fixed on the shepherd and the man who refused to give up. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his movements slow, deliberate, each shift measured to avoid shattering the fragile thread of trust. He placed another small treat on the ground, sliding it forward with 2 fingers, then returning his hand to his lap. His breathing never broke rhythm. His posture stayed grounded, patient, calm. Max's ears tilted forward, his eyes darting between the treat and the steady figure across from him. His paws shuffled, his tail twitched, and for a moment it seemed he might lunge or retreat. But then he lowered his chest again, inching forward in a cautious crawl. He sniffed the treat, hesitated, then took it. This time, instead of bolting back, he stayed closer. His body remained low, but his eyes were softer, less wild, as though searching for understanding. Gasps turned to murmurs of astonishment. Someone whispered, "He's staying closer. He didn't run." A man beside her added, "He's changing, right in front of us." And then, as Keanu whispered the word again, repeating it with steady rhythm, Max did something no one expected. He sat once more, but this time his body eased just slightly, his shoulders dropping, his breathing slowing. It was still tense, still uncertain, but it was the beginning of calm. The park fell utterly silent. The impossible had unfolded before their eyes, and no one could deny it now. Doubt still lingered. Fear still whispered. But hope had taken its first true root. The air was so still it seemed even the trees had stopped swaying. Max sat in the grass, trembling, his body torn between instinct and curiosity. His growl had softened into silence, but his eyes still burned with uncertainty. Every breath he took was shallow, fast, as if his heart was running faster than his body could keep up. The crowd leaned in, afraid to speak, afraid even to move, knowing the smallest noise could shatter the fragile thread holding the moment together. Keanu's patience did not waver. He kept his posture grounded, his shoulders loose, his breathing steady. Slowly, deliberately, he shifted one hand upward from his lap. The movement was small, simple, a gentle raise of his palm with 2 fingers lifted. It was not a demand, not a command barked into the chaos. It was a signal quiet, clear, and offered with calm authority. Max's head tilted sharply, ears flicking forward. His brow furrowed as if trying to decipher the meaning of this strange motion. He didn't lunge, didn't bark, only tilted his head again, confused but not afraid. The crowd gasped softly at his hesitation, their voices hushed but charged with awe. A man whispered, "He's watching him." A woman answered, "Like he actually understands." The shepherd's body shifted, his tail twitched, his paws shuffled. He let out a single huff of air, then lowered his chest toward the ground for a moment before rising halfway again. His movements were jerky, uncertain, but it was as though some part of him wanted to respond. He stared at the man in front of him, ears forward, eyes softening just slightly, his confusion giving way to recognition. Keanu whispered again, repeating the same word he had used all along, his voice steady as a metronome. He held the signal, his hand unmoving, his breathing synchronized with every repetition. And then, with a slow and trembling motion, Max lowered his haunches to the ground in a full sit. The crowd erupted in a wave of astonished gasps. Some clapped their hands to their mouths, others muttered prayers, and one volunteer whispered through tears. He actually sat for him. Parents lifted their children so they could see, pointing toward the impossible scene unfolding before them. Even those who had doubted the most now stood frozen in awe. Across the way, the influencer's smirk faltered. His phone wobbled slightly as he tried to steady it, but the arrogance on his face cracked for the first time. His partner, sensing the shift, whispered, "Are you still streaming this?" He muttered back, "Yeah, but what the hell?" Their mockery had no anchor anymore. Keanu's face softened, his lips curving into the faintest smile. He reached into his pocket with the same slow patience as before and placed a treat on the ground near his knee. He pushed it forward just a little, enough for Max to see, then withdrew his hand again. The shepherd's nose twitched furiously. He shuffled forward, cautious but driven, and snatched it up, before settling back into the same sitting posture. It was no trick, no accident. The impossible was happening in front of everyone's eyes. The moment stretched like glass, fragile, gleaming, and capable of shattering at the smallest break. Max sat once more, his body taut but not explosive, his eyes fixed on the calm figure in front of him. His chest rose and fell in quick bursts, but he stayed grounded, anchored to the earth in a way no one thought possible. The crowd whispered in waves. A woman near the front said in disbelief, "He's obeying him. He's actually listening." Another man muttered, "I didn't think a dog like that even knew how." Their voices carried awe, not mockery now. The volunteers who had been holding poles lowered them slightly, their hands trembling, unsure if they were witnessing a miracle or a fluke. Keanu did not break the moment with celebration. His face remained soft, his posture loose, but a smile flickered across his lips. It wasn't pride for himself, it was quiet joy for the dog before him. He reached into his pocket again, pulling out another treat. This time, he placed it closer, the movement measured and smooth, as though he were painting calm into the air. Max's ears twitched at the motion. His body stiffened briefly, then relaxed again as the man's stillness wrapped around him like a shield. He leaned forward, sniffed, then took the treat gently, retreating only a step before sitting again, almost as if repeating the earlier signal without being asked. The gasps came louder this time. Someone whispered, "He's doing it himself." Another voice cracked with emotion. "That dog's changing right in front of us." The disbelief of minutes earlier was being replaced with something else, hope. Across the crowd, the influencer's smirk collapsed completely. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. His partner gave him a nervous glance, their earlier laughter silenced. The phone in his hand caught the scene clearly, but it no longer served his mockery, it broadcast his defeat. For every viewer watching his stream, the arrogance that had filled his voice was unraveling. Keanu leaned a little closer, lowering his hand palm up again. His breathing never broke its rhythm. He repeated the soft word, his tone filled with warmth. Max's eyes softened in response. The wild blaze inside them dimmed, replaced with something quieter, something searching. His ears tilted forward, no longer pinned tight against his skull. His tail twitched again, but this time not with aggression, more like a nervous question. For the first time, Max held the man's gaze. It wasn't long, just a few seconds, but in those seconds, the air seemed to vanish from the park. The world shrank to two souls, one scarred by fear, the other patient enough to wait. The silence was profound, heavy, and beautiful. A fragile trust was forming, fragile but undeniable, and everyone who saw it knew they would never forget the sight. The circle of onlookers held as still as statues, their voices muted as though speaking would disturb the fragile thread tying man and dog together. Max remained seated, his head tilted slightly, eyes fixed on the figure before him. For the first time all day, his body looked less like a coiled spring and more like a creature caught between instinct and trust. Keanu shifted slowly, his hand moving in another clear gesture. He raised his palm halfway, then lowered it smoothly back toward his lap. It was simple, deliberate, a sign of guidance rather than control. Max's ears perked. His head tilted further, the scar along his muzzle catching the sunlight. The shepherd hesitated, processing the motion, his body trembling as if fighting through years of fear in a single instant. The crowd's anticipation thickened. People whispered without realizing it. He's showing him a command. Will the dog understand? What if he doesn't? Parents clutched their children tighter. Volunteers held their breath. Even the influencer, once smug and mocking, stood frozen, his phone recording but his voice silent. Max shuffled forward, uncertain, then stopped. His chest heaved, his tail flicked nervously, and then, as if something inside him gave way, he lowered his haunches again into a full sit. This time, it wasn't jerky or frantic. It was deliberate, chosen. The sound that broke the silence was raw awe. Gasps, cries, even the quiet sob of a volunteer who had worked with Max for months but never seen him do more than lunge or growl. He listened, she whispered, her voice trembling. He actually listened. The air filled with murmurs, voices carrying reverence instead of fear. Keanu smiled softly, his joy quiet, directed not at the crowd, but at Max. He reached forward slowly, placing a treat closer than before, then slid his hand back. Max leaned forward, sniffed, and took it gently. He didn't retreat far. He stayed where he was, seated, his eyes softening as though searching for meaning in the steady figure before him. No band, no laughter, no chaos. Only two beings staring at each other with a recognition too deep for words. Keanu's eyes carried patience, sorrow, and hope. Max's eyes, scarred by fear and survival, flickered with the first fragile spark of trust. Two wounded souls, each shaped by battles of their own, found each other in the stillness of that park. And for a brief, breathtaking moment, it seemed as though they both understood. Neither was alone anymore. The world inside the circle of grass had grown so quiet that the faint rustle of leaves could be heard above the crowd's breathing. Keanu stayed kneeling, his posture still loose, his hands resting gently on his knees. Max sat only a few feet away, ears twitching, his tail giving faint, nervous flicks. His body was coiled, but he hadn't lunged for some time. That alone felt miraculous. Slowly, Keanu shifted his weight. His hands pressed against his thighs, and with measured patience, he began to rise. The movement was cautious, deliberate, each inch calculated so as not to break the fragile trust that had formed. The crowd collectively held its breath as his shoulders lifted, his frame extending upward. Max stiffened immediately, his ears pinned back, a low growl vibrating in his throat. His eyes widened, flashing with the memory of every human who had towered over him, every moment when standing figures meant harm rather than peace. His body trembled as though preparing to spring, to undo everything that had been built. Keanu kept his motions fluid, never jerky, his breathing still steady. He rose to his feet fully, but his body language remained soft, shoulders rounded, hands open at his sides. Weight balanced so he looked less like a threat and more like a tree in the wind. Max's growl deepened, but his paws stayed planted. He hadn't lunged. That was the difference. The silence cracked suddenly. A balloon slipped from the hands of a child in the crowd, floating upward until it caught a low tree branch. With a sharp, echoing pop, it burst. The sound ripped through the air like a gunshot. Max flinched violently, barking with ferocity, his body lurching sideways. The crowd screamed, the fragile calm breaking into chaos once again. A woman covered her child's ears. A man pulled his wife behind him. Panic threatened to spiral back to the beginning. But Keanu reacted instantly, dropping low once more, returning his body to the same grounded posture as before. He sank into the grass, his head lowered, his hands open, his breathing calm. His voice, quiet but firm, repeated the same soft word, steady as a chant, reminding Max of the rhythm he had already begun to trust. Max snarled, snapping his teeth in the air, his body twisting in confusion. His paws dug trenches into the dirt, but then, as Keanu's stillness wrapped around him again, the fury ebbed into whimpers. His growl thinned into something weaker, almost desperate. His eyes darted from the crowd to the man in front of him, as if weighing whether to fall back into fear or lean into the strange calm. The crowd gasped again, softer this time, as they saw the shepherd's body slowly steady. The panic that had nearly destroyed the fragile bond began to subside. His tail flicked, uncertain, his ears half raised now. He whimpered once more, then lowered his chest slightly toward the ground, breathing hard but no longer striking. Keanu repeated the signal, hand low and palm open, unmoving except for the rise and fall of his breath. He whispered once more, quiet and steady. And Max, inch by inch, let his growl dissolve into silence. The storm receded again. The park seemed to exhale as Max steadied once more, his chest heaving, but no longer vibrating with growls. His paws shifted cautiously, pressing into the dirt with uncertain weight. He blinked, his eyes softening by degrees, every second a battle between instinct and trust. The crowd had gone silent again, their fear mixing now with wonder. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his palms still open, his shoulders lowered. His voice carried the same quiet rhythm, the soft word repeated with patience. Then, in a deliberate gesture, he edged one hand closer, not fast, not reaching, simply placing it nearer to the shepherd's space. He left it there, unmoving, an invitation. Max froze, his body stiff, his ears pricked forward. He sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring as Keanu's scent reached him more fully. A sharp bark burst from his chest, startling some children, but he didn't lunge. Instead, he stayed where he was, his eyes locked on the hand in front of him. His growl rose briefly, then died in his throat. He whined, a trembling note of conflict. Keanu whispered again, his voice unbroken. He moved his hand forward just an inch more, then stopped, grounding himself with another deep breath. His body language spoke louder than words: stillness, patience, trust. Max inched forward, nose low, his body crouched. The crowd's breath seemed to vanish, the entire park holding still. The shepherd sniffed once, twice, his breath hot against Keanu's skin. His teeth flashed as he opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. For a moment, it looked like fear might win, like the fragile thread would snap. But then, with trembling courage, Max touched his nose to Keanu's palm. Gasps erupted, followed by silence so thick it felt holy. Keanu didn't move. He let the contact linger, offering nothing but his steady breath. And then, as if sealing the fragile bond, Max's tongue darted out once in a hesitant lick. The spell shattered with the sound of applause. The circle of onlookers broke into cheers, clapping, some even crying openly. A volunteer whispered in disbelief, "I've never seen him do that. Not once. Not with anyone." A mother hugged her daughter tightly, tears streaking her cheeks. The impossible was unfolding before their eyes, and they were witnessing every second. Keanu did not stand, did not turn to the crowd. He ignored the roar of approval and kept his focus entirely on Max. His hands stayed open, his eyes gentle, his voice still low and steady. To him, this wasn't a performance. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about the scarred dog before him, about giving him one moment of peace he had never known. Max's body trembled less now. His ears tilted forward, his tail gave a tentative sway, uncertain but real. He stayed close to the man in front of him, choosing stillness over flight. For the first time all day, tension gave way to hope. The crowd's doubt had begun to melt, and in the center of it all, Keanu and Max shared a fragile connection that felt unbreakable. The applause still rippled faintly when a small, almost trembling voice pierced through the crowd's noise. It was not loud, but it carried in the silence that followed the miracle. A little girl, no older than 8, clutched her mother's hand at the front edge of the circle. Her hair was pulled into 2 braids, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. She tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, he's not scary. He's just sad." The words were simple, but they cut through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. A few people nearby heard her and turned, their expressions softening. Even Keanu's head tilted slightly at the sound. His lips curved with the faintest smile as he glanced toward her, acknowledging the truth in her innocent observation. The mother bent low, her face lined with worry. "Lily," she whispered firmly, "stay back. It's not safe." But the girl's eyes never left Max. She wasn't watching his scars or his bared teeth. She was watching the way his tail twitched, the way his ears shifted forward, the way his posture seemed less like rage and more like exhaustion. Children often saw what adults overlooked. Keanu caught the exchange. His gaze met Lily's mother's for a moment, steady and reassuring. He gave the smallest nod, as if to say there was no rush, no force, only trust. Then he looked at Lily, his expression warm and gentle, inviting without words. He tilted his hand slightly toward the space beside him, an unspoken invitation. The mother's grip tightened around her daughter's hand. She shook her head, whispering again, "No, sweetheart, it's too dangerous." Fear clouded her voice, the fear every parent knew when danger lingered too close. But Lily tugged harder, her young face determined. "Please, Mom. He just needs someone to be nice to him." The crowd stirred at her words. Some murmured anxiously. Others leaned in, captivated. A volunteer near the back muttered, "She can't go near that dog." Another whispered, "Maybe she's right. Maybe he just needs kindness." The divide in the air was sharp, torn between dread and hope. Keanu lowered his voice then, speaking softly to the mother. His tone was calm, steady, the same rhythm he had used for Max. "It's all right," he said gently. "I'll stay with her. I won't let anything happen." His assurance was quiet but carried weight, his presence steady as the ground itself. The mother hesitated, her heart racing. She looked at her daughter, then at the dog. then at the man who had already done the impossible. The circle of eyes around her seemed to press in, waiting to see what she would decide. Finally, after a long moment, her grip loosened. She knelt, kissed the top of Lily's head, and whispered, "Stay close. Don't move too fast." Lily nodded quickly, her braids bouncing. Her small hand slipped free of her mother's, and she stepped forward, each movement careful, her tiny frame almost lost against the grass. The crowd gasped, whispers spreading, some with fear, some with awe. And Keanu, still crouched low beside Max, extended his arm slightly toward her in encouragement. Lily walked slowly, her small shoes pressing into the grass, her body trembling but her eyes unshaken. She didn't see the monster others had feared. She saw the tired dog sitting before the quiet man. She stopped a step behind Keanu, glancing at him as if asking permission. Keanu gave her a gentle nod, lowering his hand again to show her how to move slow, steady, calm. The crowd had fallen into complete silence, the kind that made even the breeze feel loud. Dozens of eyes followed her every step. Parents gripped their children tightly, some whispering prayers under their breath, others too caught between terror and wonder to speak at all. The influencer's phone was still recording, but his smug commentary had vanished. Even he was silent now, his camera capturing something he didn't know how to mock. Lily dropped to her knees beside Keanu, mirroring his posture. She folded her legs under her, her hands resting carefully in her lap. Her face was soft, unguarded, and filled with the simple innocence of a child who believed in kindness. She whispered, so quietly only Keanu heard, "He looks so lonely." Keanu's voice was just as low, steady as stone. "Dogs can feel when someone sees them," he said gently. "He knows you're not afraid." Lily nodded, her eyes fixed on Max, whose ears twitched at the sound of her small voice. Keanu moved his hand, inching forward with his palm open, and gestured lightly for Lily to do the same. Her tiny fingers stretched out, trembling but brave. Together, their hands rested just inches from the ground between them, a bridge offered to the scarred shepherd. Max froze, his body stiffened, his eyes darted between the girl and the man. He growled, a low warning that made several people in the crowd gasp sharply. Lily flinched but did not pull back. Keanu whispered softly, repeating the calming word he had used all along. His breathing stayed steady, and he tilted his head toward Lily, reassuring her with his calm. The growl faded into a whimper. Max's nose twitched furiously, the scent of innocence and gentleness reaching him. He lowered his head, inch by inch, his body tense but not lunging. His nostrils flared as he sniffed the ground near their hands. The silence grew so heavy, it felt like the entire park had been swallowed by it. Then, with a hesitant, trembling motion, Max pressed his nose gently against Lily's small fingers. Her breath caught, her eyes wide with awe. Tears sprang into her mother's eyes at the sight, her hand covering her mouth. The crowd erupted into gasps, some crying, some clapping softly before quieting themselves again. Lily giggled softly, the sound pure and unbroken, and whispered, "See, Mom? He's not scary at all." Her words carried like truth into the comment. Stunned silence. Max lingered there, nose against her hand, before pulling back slightly. His ears tilted forward, his eyes softer than they had been all day. For the first time, the dog who had been called dangerous, hopeless, unfixable, had shown gentleness, and it had been drawn out by the touch of a child. Lily's small hand lingered in the air even after Max had pulled back. Her cheeks flushed with excitement, her eyes bright, as she turned toward her mother. With all the innocence and determination a child's heart could carry, she asked, "Mom, can we take him home?" The question seemed to ripple through the crowd, like a spark hitting dry grass. People shifted, murmurs rose, and all eyes turned toward the woman who stood trembling on the edge of the circle. Her hand covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her body was frozen with fear. She shook her head weakly, her voice breaking. "Lily, he's dangerous. You saw what he did before. We can't." But the little girl's voice cut through the doubt with stubborn clarity. "He's not dangerous. He's just sad. I know it. Please, Mom. He likes me."
Her words were desperate yet filled with certainty.
She leaned closer to Max again, her tiny frame showing no fear, only compassion. The crowd stirred. A few parents began to clap softly, encouraging the mother. "She's right," someone whispered. Another voice joined in. "Look at him. He's calm with her. He's not fighting anymore." The murmurs turned into a gentle chorus, dozens of strangers rallying around a child's plea. The woman's shoulders shook as she wiped her eyes. Her heart was torn between instinct and what she was witnessing. She wanted to protect her daughter, yet she couldn't ignore the miracle happening in front of her. Her voice cracked as she whispered back, "Sweetheart, I don't know if we can handle him." Keanu shifted slightly, his voice steady, offering the same reassurance he had given Max moments earlier. "You won't be alone," he said softly, loud enough for the mother to hear, but calm enough not to startle the dog. "I'll help. I'll cover the cost of his training, every lesson. I'll make sure he has what he needs. You don't have to be afraid of this." His tone carried not just promise, but conviction, a pledge grounded in the patience everyone had already seen. The crowd erupted into applause at his words, some shouting encouragement to the mother. A volunteer stepped forward, her face wet with tears. "If this family wants him, we'll do everything we can to support them," she said firmly. Another added, "He deserves this chance. He's earned it today." The influencer, who had been streaming in smug silence, snapped suddenly, his voice rising above the cheers. "This is insane. You're going to give a monster to a little kid? Are you all crazy?" His words hung in the air for a moment, sour and jarring, but the sound of soft cheers and clapping quickly drowned him out. The crowd had chosen what they wanted to believe, and it wasn't his bitterness. The mother stepped forward slowly, her knees weak, her eyes locked on her daughter kneeling beside the scarred shepherd. Lily looked up at her with wide, pleading eyes. "Please, Mom. He needs us. And I need him." The woman trembled, her heart breaking open under the weight of the moment. She reached down, stroking Lily's hair, then looked at Keanu, who was still seated in the grass, calm and unwavering. Something in his expression told her it was safe, that it was possible. For the first time, her lips curved into the faintest smile. "All right," she whispered, her voice shaking. "We'll try." The mother's words, soft, trembling, but filled with reluctant hope, ignited the crowd. Applause swelled louder than before, cheers rising as though the park itself had transformed into a place of redemption. Strangers clapped each other on the back. Parents hugged their children, and volunteers wiped tears from their cheeks. It wasn't just about a dog anymore. It was about witnessing a moment when fear gave way to courage and despair bent into possibility. Lily squealed with joy, throwing her arms around her mother's waist. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you." Her little voice cracked with happiness, and she turned quickly back to Max, her braids bouncing. The shepherd stiffened at the sudden burst of movement, but Keanu steadied him with a calm signal, his voice low and reassuring. Max's eyes flickered, his ears twitching, but instead of lunging away, he leaned slightly forward toward Lily, sniffing at her again as though he already understood what had changed. A shelter volunteer hurried forward, a clipboard in hand, still blinking back tears. If you're sure," she said, her voice shaking, "we can start the paperwork right now." Her hands trembled as she flipped through forms, clearly overwhelmed by what she was witnessing. Another volunteer chimed in, "We'll waive every extra requirement. He belongs with her. Anyone can see it now." Keanu rose slowly, keeping his body language soft so Max didn't feel threatened. He stood beside Lily and her mother, his presence like a shield. "I'll cover his training, every lesson, every checkup," he promised again, his tone steady. "I'll stay connected. This won't just be your journey, it'll be ours." His words carried the weight of commitment, not just spoken to reassure, but anchored in the actions he had already shown. The mother's eyes shimmered as she nodded, reaching shakily for the pen. Her hands fumbled as she signed the forms, each stroke of ink sealing the decision. Lily clapped her hands together in excitement, whispering softly to Max, "You're coming home with me." The shepherd leaned closer, his nose brushing against her arm. For the first time, instead of growling or snapping, he lingered there. His body still trembled, but it trembled less. His eyes no longer burned with fury. They softened, searching. Then, with a motion that broke the crowd into tears, Max pressed his head gently against Lily's shoulder. The applause erupted again, louder than before, some people sobbing openly, others cheering as though victory had been won. The sound carried across the park, drowning out the last bitter mutterings of the influencer. He sneered at his phone, spitting insults under his breath, but no one was listening. His voice was swallowed by the joy of the moment. With his smirk gone and his presence unwanted, he lowered his phone, shoved it into his pocket, and stormed off through the crowd, his partner trailing awkwardly behind him. None of it mattered anymore. What mattered was the image at the center of the park. A scarred dog leaning into the embrace of a child, a mother signing her name with trembling hope, and a quiet man standing guard, with patience carved into every line of his face. It was a picture no one there would ever forget. The roar of applause swelled again as the paperwork was sealed, but the sound soon gave way to something deeper. The crowd pressed in, not to intrude, but to surround the small family, the shepherd, and the quiet man who had made it possible. Volunteers emerged from behind the booths, some with tears streaming down their faces, others with their arms crossed in disbelief. One volunteer, the same young man who had whispered earlier that Max was unfixable, stepped forward hesitantly. His face was flushed, his eyes wet. "I didn't believe it," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I thought he'd never change. I was sure we'd lose him. I was wrong." He reached out a trembling hand, gripping Keanu's arm for a moment in gratitude. Others followed, voices layered with confession and relief. "We tried for months and got nowhere. We thought he was too far gone. We were ready to give up." Each word carried the weight of guilt and the release of seeing hope where there had been none. Keanu shook his head gently, his smile faint but humble. "It wasn't me," he said quietly. "He just needed time and someone to believe he was worth it." His voice carried through the circle, simple but powerful. The words struck those listening harder than any grand speech could have. The crowd clapped again, but this time the sound wasn't explosive. It was steady, rhythmic, like gratitude itself had found its voice. Some people cried openly, others filmed with shaking hands, desperate to capture the moment that would stay in their hearts long after the park emptied. At the center of it all, Lily wrapped her arms around Max's neck. The shepherd stiffened at first, but Keanu's steady presence calmed him. Slowly, the dog leaned into the embrace, his head resting against the girl's small shoulder. The sight drew sobs from those watching. Parents wiped tears, strangers hugged, and even the toughest volunteers could not hide their trembling chins. Keanu stood quietly, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, watching the reunion unfold. His expression wasn't one of pride, but of gratitude. Gratitude that he had been there, that he had been able to wait long enough for the dog to feel safe, that a child's heart had done what the crowd's fear could not. His small smile curved gently, the kind that came not from victory, but from peace. The shelter director, a woman with silver hair and deep lines etched into her face, pushed her way gently to the front. She had watched from the very beginning, her clipboard clutched to her chest, her eyes filled with worry that had now softened into awe. She stepped toward Keanu and without hesitation wrapped her arms around him. "You saved more than one life today," she whispered against his shoulder. Her voice broke, heavy with years of carrying the weight of too many unwanted animals. "You saved his, you saved hers, and you reminded all of us what we're fighting for." Keanu returned the embrace briefly, then stepped back, his expression humble. He nodded toward Max and Lily. "They saved each other," he said simply. The shelter director's words echoed in the hearts of those who heard them. Many in the crowd wiped their faces, unable to hold back the swell of emotion. The volunteers who had once seen Max as a hopeless case now looked at him as if he were a miracle. And perhaps he was, not because he had changed overnight, but because someone had believed he could. A middle-aged volunteer with tired eyes and a faded shelter shirt stepped forward. She had spent countless hours trying to calm Max in his kennel, enduring his growls and lunges. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I used to cry after every shift because I thought we were failing him. Today I finally feel like he's free." She reached out to squeeze Keanu's hand, then crouched to watch Lily stroke Max's scarred muzzle. Her tears fell freely, but her smile never wavered. The circle around them grew tighter, people moving closer, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Phones rose again, capturing the sight of a girl and a dog whose bond had been forged in a single, fragile afternoon. Strangers whispered to one another, promises that they would tell their children about this day, that they would never forget what they had seen. Keanu's eyes drifted over the crowd, taking in the faces, parents holding children, teenagers filming through tears, elders clasping their hands in prayer. He didn't stand tall or wave to acknowledge the praise. He remained still, almost apart from the celebration, as though he understood the moment was not about him at all. The applause swelled again when Max shifted closer to Lily, pressing his side against her. The dog who had snarled and lunged only hours before was leaning willingly into a child's embrace. The crowd erupted into cheers, some sobbing openly, others clapping until their hands stung. Lily laughed through her tears, whispering words only Max could hear. Keanu allowed himself a deeper smile then, not broad or boastful, but filled with quiet relief. His shoulders relaxed, his eyes softened, and he inhaled deeply, as if letting go of the tension he had carried since stepping into the circle. The shelter director wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and turned to the crowd. "What you saw today wasn't just one adoption," she said firmly. "It was proof. Proof that patience and love are stronger than fear. Proof that every animal, no matter how broken, deserves a chance." Her voice cracked but grew louder. "And proof that hope is never wasted." The words drew a final wave of applause. Strangers hugged, children clapped their hands, and even the hardest skeptics bowed their heads in respect. The volunteers who had nearly given up found themselves renewed, their spirits lifted by what they had witnessed. Keanu, still quiet, lowered his gaze back to Lily and Max. He watched the girl, stroked the shepherd's ears as if they had always belonged together. He didn't step into the spotlight. He didn't seek the attention. He simply allowed the moment to breathe, to belong to them. For everyone else, it was a spectacle, a miracle, a story to share. For Keanu, it was something simpler, something purer. The sight of trust being born where there had once been only fear. And for that, he smiled softly, humbled beyond words. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon by the time Keanu returned home. The day's noise, the clapping, the shouts, the tears, all of it seemed distant now, replaced by the quiet hum of his house. He dropped his keys onto the wooden table near the door, the faint clatter echoing in the silence. His jacket hung heavy across his shoulders, and he slipped it off, draping it neatly over a chair. He walked slowly through the rooms, every step grounding him in the solitude he had grown used to. The world outside often felt overwhelming, bright lights, crowds, voices clamoring for attention. But here, in the stillness, there was peace. He sank into his armchair near the window where the city lights flickered faintly in the distance. For a long moment, he didn't move at all. His mind replayed the images of the park, each one etched into him with vivid clarity. The scarred shepherd trembling with fear, the whispers of doubt, the gasps when Max sat for the first time. He remembered Lily's small hand reaching out bravely, her voice cutting through fear with childlike honesty. "He's not scary, he's just sad." Those words lingered in his chest, heavier than any cheer from the crowd. He leaned back, closing his eyes. The memories that surfaced weren't just of the dog and the girl. They were of his own past, the ache of loss, the emptiness left behind by people he loved, the struggles that had shaped him. He thought of the nights when silence pressed in too close, when grief felt like it might swallow him whole. He thought of the times he longed for connection, but kept himself at arm's length, unsure if he deserved it. The image of Max pressing his head against Lily's shoulder came unbidden, searing into his thoughts. That broken animal had found something in a child's innocence that no training tool or shouted command could ever give him: belief. It stirred something deep inside him, a reminder that broken spirits were not meant to remain shattered. They could heal. Slowly, painfully, but they could heal. Keanu reached to the small table beside his chair and pulled out a worn leather journal. Its pages were filled with uneven handwriting, some neat, some hurried, but all marked with sincerity. He clicked his pen, let the tip hover above the page for a long moment, then began to write. Patience, he wrote first. The letters curved slowly, deliberate. He paused, then continued. Trust is not given, it's earned, and earning it means waiting longer than feels comfortable. His hand moved again. Humility is seeing that it was never about you. It's about them, the ones who need to know they matter. He stopped, tapping the pen gently against the page. The silence in the room felt different now, not empty but full of the weight of what he had seen, of the hope carried in Lily's eyes, of the gentle way Max had leaned in at last. He bowed his head, whispering a quiet thank you to no one in particular. The pen rested between his fingers as he stared at the words he had written. Each line seemed to echo back at him, not as advice to others, but as reminders to himself. Patience, trust, humility. These had been themes of his own life, though not always mastered. How many times had he longed for someone to wait for him, to believe in him even when he stumbled? He wrote again, the ink flowing slowly across the page. Fear hides behind anger. Sometimes all it takes is silence to let the fear speak, and once it speaks, it can begin to fade. He paused, considering the dog's frantic growls, the way they dissolved into whimpers when calm surrounded him. He had seen the same in people: anger masking grief, cruelty hiding loneliness. Max was not unlike many he had known, including himself. Keanu leaned back in his chair, letting the pen drop to the table. He rubbed his temples gently, his mind drifting again. He thought of his younger years in Toronto, the stray dogs he used to see darting between alleys, their ribs sharp beneath their coats. He used to wonder who had hurt them, who had left them behind. Those animals had carried the same haunted look he saw today in Max. And yet, he remembered, sometimes they would pause, wag their tails timidly if someone offered them kindness. Even the most battered creatures still longed for connection. He rose from the chair and walked to the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water. The reflection in the window caught his eye. His own face, older now, lined by both joy and sorrow. He stared at it for a long time, then spoke softly to his reflection. You're still learning too. His voice sounded strange in the quiet house, but it grounded him. Returning to his seat, he picked up the journal again, flipping back through earlier entries. Notes about grief, about film sets, about moments of fleeting happiness scribbled in margins. Today's words stood out against them all. They carried weight not just of thought, but of action, of something lived rather than imagined. He wrote one final sentence for the night. Sometimes the broken heal us more than we heal them. The pen scratched softly, sealing the truth onto paper. Keanu closed the journal, resting his hand on its worn cover. The house was silent again, but it no longer felt heavy. Instead, it felt full of quiet gratitude. He thought of Lily's voice, her fearless whisper. He's not scary, he's just sad. He thought of Max leaning into her shoulder, scars and all, finally seen not as a threat but as a soul worth loving. Leaning back in his chair, Keanu closed his eyes. A small smile touched his lips, the kind that came not from applause or headlines, but from knowing he had witnessed something pure. In the darkness of his quiet home, he whispered again, "Thank you." And with that, the night settled around him, soft and steady, carrying the promise of healing into tomorrow. By the next morning, the world beyond the park had already begun to buzz. The first clips appeared online just hours after the event ended. Short, shaky videos recorded by dozens of phones that had circled the grass. They showed a scarred shepherd lunging in terror, the crowd scattering, and then the unbelievable shift. A Hollywood actor kneeling low, whispering softly, waiting patiently until the impossible unfolded. The captions wrote themselves. Hollywood star tames unadoptable dog. Keanu Reeves saves shelter dog in front of stunned crowd. Proof that compassion is stronger than fear. Within minutes, the clip spread across social media platforms, bouncing from one feed to another, gathering views faster than anyone expected. Comment sections exploded. Some posts collected thousands of replies in hours, filled with people sharing their own experiences. I adopted a dog no one else wanted. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. This made me cry. I lost my rescue last year. And seeing this reminds me why I'll adopt again. Others were shorter, but no less powerful. This is what humanity should look like. Keanu doesn't just play heroes, he is one. News outlets picked up the story almost instantly. Morning anchors replayed the footage, their voices tinged with awe. What you're seeing, one anchor explained to viewers, is not just a movie star. This is a man who chose patience over pride, compassion over fear. Another called it a lesson in humility the whole country could use. Clips rolled on repeat. Keanu kneeling with hands open, Max sniffing tentatively. Lily's small hand extended bravely, the shepherd pressing his head into her shoulder. The images replayed until they became iconic, symbols of something larger than one afternoon in a park. As the story spread, rescue groups seized the moment. Shelters across the country posted the clips with captions like, "Every dog deserves this," "Chance," and "Adopt, don't shop." Adoption applications rose within days, with families citing the video as inspiration. Volunteers who had fought discouragement for years found themselves fielding calls from people asking, "Do you have any dogs like Max?" Meanwhile, Keanu himself stayed quiet. Reporters camped near his home, eager for comment, but he offered none. Requests for interviews poured in from talk shows and magazines, but he declined them all. For him, it had never been about publicity. The park had been about Max, about Lily, about waiting long enough for trust to take root. That was enough. The silence only fueled admiration. Social media filled with praise for his humility, the way he refused to claim credit. Memes spread with captions. In a world full of noise, be like Keanu, quiet, steady, kind. Posts with millions of likes declared, "We don't deserve him." But beneath the humor and admiration, a deeper truth carried through. America wasn't just seeing a celebrity. They were seeing a man kneeling in the grass, choosing patience over pride. The footage had become more than a viral clip. It had become a mirror, reflecting what people longed to believe about themselves, that compassion could still win, that brokenness could be healed, that gentleness could be stronger than fear. The wave of attention didn't stop with morning shows or local shelters. National outlets picked up the footage, replaying it during primetime news hours. Commentators who usually argued politics and policy paused to reflect on something far simpler. One said, "We've spent months debating what divides us. Maybe we should take a lesson from a man kneeling in the grass, showing us that patience and empathy still matter." Editorials appeared in major papers, each one framing the story as more than a celebrity moment. One headline read, "The dog, the girl, and the actor who waited." Another declared, "A lesson in listening, from Keanu Reeves to a broken animal." Writers spoke of humility, of kindness, of the power of waiting instead of forcing. Some readers admitted they hadn't cried at news in years until they saw Lily's small hand being pressed against Max's scarred muzzle. Online, the reaction only grew. Videos of people's own rescues flooded timelines. Families posed with their adopted dogs, writing captions like, "This is Bella. We almost didn't take her because of her fear. Now she sleeps on my pillow." Others shared stories of failure, of dogs they hadn't been able to help, thanking Keanu for reminding them that even those failures didn't erase the worth of trying. The video reached international audiences as well. Headlines in Europe, South America, and Asia spread the story. Actor brings dog back from fear. Keanu Reeves shows the world a different kind of strength. Translations carried the same weight, the same awe, as viewers across cultures saw not a performance, but a moment of unguarded humanity. Back home, the influencer who had mocked the event tried to salvage his reputation. He posted clips of himself shouting that the adoption was reckless, that the dog was dangerous, that the crowd had been fooled by a show. But the internet was merciless. His comment sections filled with scorn, viewers writing, "You laughed at kindness and were silenced by compassion." Others simply posted still images of Max leaning against Lily, no words needed. His audience dwindled, while the story of patience spread far beyond him. Through it all, Keanu never stepped into the spotlight. He declined every invitation to speak, every offer for interviews. When pressed by journalists, he only said quietly, "It wasn't about me," before moving on. His silence spoke louder than any statement. People admired him not only for what he had done, but for how he refused to turn it into a performance. The clip continued to circulate, reaching millions. In homes across the country, families gathered around their screens, not to watch an actor, but to see proof that gentleness still mattered. For some, it was a reminder to call their local shelter. For others, it was a spark of hope in a week filled with headlines about conflict and division. And for many, it was simply the image that would stay with them: a scarred dog, a brave little girl, and a man kneeling in the grass, steady and silent, offering time instead of force. It was more than a story. It was a vision of what compassion could look like. The shelter director called him just days after the adoption, her voice carrying the same mixture of awe and gratitude she had shown in the park. She told him the staff hadn't stopped talking about what had happened, about the way Max had transformed in front of their eyes, about the little girl who had shown the world what trust looked like. But more than anything, she told him about the families who had flooded their phones and inboxes, asking how they could learn to help the dogs that were still waiting. "We've never had this kind of response," she admitted. "People want to know what you did, how you did it. They want to be part of it. Keanu, would you come back? Would you host a class for us?" There was a long pause before he answered. He wasn't interested in lights, cameras, or being paraded as a savior. His voice was quiet when he replied, "I'll do it, but on one condition: no spotlight, no press, just families, volunteers, and the dogs." The director agreed without hesitation. Words spread quietly, but it was enough. By the time the first Saturday rolled around, the park looked different. Instead of a chaotic fair filled with booths and balloons, the open field had been cleared and arranged with folding chairs, water bowls, and shaded tents. Dozens of families gathered, each with a dog tugging gently at a leash, some timid, some excitable, a few already showing the same kind of restless energy Max once had. Volunteers moved through the crowd, offering snacks, supplies, and encouragement. When Keanu arrived, he wore the same simple clothes he always did: jeans, boots, a plain shirt. There was no announcement, no grand entrance. He simply walked to the center, smiled at the families, and knelt down on the grass just as he had before. The crowd quieted, leaning in as though about to witness something sacred. He began not with commands, but with stillness. He told the families to take a breath, to feel the air fill their lungs, to let their shoulders loosen. "Dogs read us before they hear us," he said gently. "They feel the storm inside before we open our mouths. If you want calm, you have to show calm." His voice carried no performance, only conviction earned by patience. He demonstrated with a volunteer's anxious terrier. The little dog barked furiously at the crowd, pulling against the leash, but Keanu lowered himself slowly to the ground. He exhaled deeply, his body softening. He placed a treat near the dog, then looked away, giving space. Within minutes, the barking lessened, the dog sniffed, and then he approached cautiously to claim the reward. The families murmured in awe, but Keanu shook his head softly. "This isn't magic, it's time. It's waiting until they believe you mean them no harm." Parents practiced next, their children sitting beside them. One by one, they tried breathing slowly, loosening their grip on the leash, rewarding at the right moment. Some dogs responded quickly, others needed more space, but each tiny step forward was met with quiet encouragement. Smiles bloomed across faces that had carried doubt only an hour earlier. Keanu stayed low, moving between groups, offering gentle corrections, reminding them, "Don't rush, don't force. Patience isn't weakness, it's strength." For the first time, many families realized they weren't just training their dogs, they were learning to steady themselves. As the afternoon went on, the field transformed. The sharp barks and anxious pulls that had filled the air in the beginning slowly gave way to softer sounds, sniffs, cautious whines, the patting of paws exploring more calmly. Families looked at each other with surprised smiles, realizing their dogs were responding in ways they hadn't believed possible. One boy, about Lily's age, laughed when his skittish spaniel finally sat after 5 minutes of quiet waiting. He turned to his father, eyes wide, and said, "Dad." She listened to me. The father ruffled his hair, laughing with relief. Another couple wept openly when their rescue pit bull, once labeled uncontrollable, leaned against their legs for the first time. Their tears fell as they whispered, "He's never done that before." Keanu moved through the groups without hurry, kneeling again and again, guiding families with gentle reminders. "Reward the try, not the perfection," he said softly to one mother. To another struggling with her excitable puppy, he whispered, "Don't fight the leash. Breathe. Let him feel you're not against him." Everywhere he went, the energy shifted. Dogs settling, people exhaling. By the end of the session, the field looked unrecognizable. Dogs that had entered barking and lunging were lying down beside their families, tongues lolling, tails thumping lazily against the grass. Children who had clutched their parents' hands in fear were now giggling as they handed out treats. Even the volunteers who had carried years of exhaustion on their faces were smiling, their spirits lifted by the simple act of watching change unfold. When the crowd clapped for him, Keanu shook his head, his smile humble. "This isn't about me," he said quietly. "It's about you and them. It's about the time you're willing to give. That's what changes everything." The director, standing at the edge of the crowd, wiped her eyes. She knew this couldn't end with one class. She approached him afterward, her voice hushed with emotion. "Keanu, we need more of this. People are ready. They want to learn. Will you help us keep this going?" He paused, thoughtful, then nodded. "I'll fund the sessions. Quietly. No banners, no names on walls. Just keep teaching families. Make it about the dogs, not about me." Over the following weeks, new classes were scheduled, each one filling faster than the last. Word spread through neighborhoods, through schools, through community boards. Families came with hope. Volunteers came with renewed energy, and the lessons grew into something lasting. Keanu attended when he could, always quiet, always blending in with the crowd. He didn't stand at the front like a celebrity. He knelt in the grass beside strangers, guiding them as if they were equals. Every time he whispered the same truths, patience, trust, humility, the field shifted again. And every time, another dog found calm, another family found joy. No cameras followed him, no interviews were given. But slowly, steadily, something bigger took root. An invisible mission, seated in a park by a scarred dog and a little girl, now blossoming into a movement that carried his name only in whispers. Months had passed since that extraordinary afternoon in the park. Seasons shifted, days slipped quietly by, and yet for one family, life had been changed in ways too deep to measure. In a cozy 2-bedroom home on the edge of town, Lily's laughter often rang through the halls. At night, when the house grew still, the sound of steady breathing filled her bedroom. Max lay curled on the rug beside her bed, his once restless body now stretched in comfort, his chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. His scars remained, faint reminders of a harsher life, but they no longer defined him. To Lily, they were simply part of the dog who had become her shadow. Each morning, Lily would wake to find Max watching over her, his amber eyes glowing softly in the light that slipped through the curtains. The moment she stirred, his tail thumped against the floor, slow at first, then faster as she reached down to stroke his ears. She whispered secrets to him, that no one else heard, stories of her dreams, promises that she would never let him feel alone again. Max would press his nose into her palm, content with every word. Her mother, once consumed by fear, found herself watching the bond with astonishment. She remembered how her stomach had clenched that day, how she had almost pulled her daughter back, how her instinct had screamed that Max could never be trusted. But now, months later, her voice carried nothing but emotion when she admitted, "I was afraid. I thought bringing him home would be dangerous. But now I can't imagine life without him." She saw the changes in her daughter most clearly. Lily walked taller, her steps filled with confidence. She no longer clutched her mother's hand nervously in crowded places. Instead, she held Max's leash, the dog pacing steadily by her side. On their daily walks, Max walked with his head high, his tail wagging, alert but not anxious. When strangers approached, his posture was protective but never aggressive. He was no longer the snarling creature behind a cage. He had become a guardian, loyal and steady. Neighbors noticed. At first, some had crossed the street when they saw Max, wary of his muscular frame and the faint scars around his muzzle. But over time, they watched as children reached out to pet him, and he responded with gentle sniffs and quiet patience. Soon enough, their fear turned into admiration. "That's the dog from the story," one neighbor whispered as Max strolled calmly past. "He's not scary at all, he's incredible." Inside the home, the transformation was just as powerful. The once empty corners where silence had lingered were now filled with the rhythm of paws, spatting against wood floors, with soft sighs as Max dozed at Lily's feet while she did her homework. He became part of the family's heartbeat, woven into every routine. At night, Lily's mother often stood in the doorway of her daughter's room, watching Max stretched out beside the bed. She would shake her head in disbelief, whispering, "I can't believe I almost said no." And each time, gratitude welled inside her. Gratitude for the man who had given them the courage to take a chance. Because one stranger had believed, their family had been remade. One crisp Saturday morning, months after the adoption, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of Lily's street. Keanu had promised the shelter director he would visit quietly, just once, to see how things were going. He didn't announce himself, didn't bring cameras or reporters. He simply walked up the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, his stride unhurried. Lily spotted him first. She was playing in the yard, chalk drawings scattered across the pavement, while Max lay sprawled in the sun nearby. The moment she recognized him, her eyes lit up. She leapt to her feet and shouted, "Keanu!" Max's head shot up at the sound, ears twitching. Within seconds, the shepherd was bounding toward the gate, his tail wagging with a force no one at the park could have imagined. Keanu crouched low as Max barreled forward, his body language calm and open. Max slowed as he reached him, sniffed once, then pressed his head against Keanu's chest, tail sweeping back and forth like a broom. Keanu's hand found the scarred muzzle, stroking it gently. "You've done well, haven't you?" he whispered. Lily ran up behind Max, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck. "He sleeps in my room every night," she said proudly. "He keeps the bad dreams away." Her smile was wide, innocent, filled with the kind of joy that only children carried. Her mother stood on the porch, her eyes glassy with emotion. She stepped down the steps slowly, her voice breaking as she said, "When we first brought him home, I wasn't sure I could handle it. I was terrified, honestly. But now, I don't know how we ever lived without him. He's part of us. He's family." Keanu nodded, listening without interrupting, his hand still resting on Max's head. His smile was small but warm, the kind that came not from pride but from quiet gratitude. "He just needed someone to believe," he said softly. "And you gave him that." Max sat obediently beside Lily, his body relaxed, his tail thumping gently against the grass. He looked nothing like the snarling creature who had broken his leash months earlier. Now he looked every bit the loyal companion, a protector, a friend, a reminder of what patience could create. The family invited Keanu inside, but he shook his head. "No," he said kindly. "This is your story now." He glanced at Lily, then back at Max, pride shining faintly in his eyes. "I just wanted to see him happy, and he is." The mother reached out, squeezing his hand with both of hers. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "You didn't just change his life, you changed ours." Keanu gave one final stroke along Max's ears before standing. The shepherd licked his hand once, as if to say goodbye. Keanu chuckled softly, whispered another word of thanks, and stepped back toward the sidewalk. As he walked away, Lily called out, "We'll take care of him, I promise." Keanu lifted a hand in a wave, his smile lingering. He didn't need to look back to know it was true. Because of one choice, a family had been transformed, and a broken spirit had found his forever home. The sun had already set by the time Keanu returned home that evening. The streets were quiet, the city's usual rush muted, as though the world itself had slowed down. He stepped inside, hung up his jacket, and sat in the same chair where so many nights of thought and memory had unfolded. But tonight felt different. Tonight his heart carried the weight of gratitude more than sorrow. He thought of Max, of the scars along the dog's body, of the way his eyes had once darted with fear, and then he pictured the gentle wag of a tail. The sight of that same dog stretched peacefully across the rug of a little girl's bedroom. Healing, he realized, had nothing to do with force. It came from patience, from stillness, from the willingness to believe in what others had already written off. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Quietly, almost to himself, he spoke words that could just as easily have been meant for the world. If a dog written off as dangerous can change, so can we. The truth of it echoed through him. He had lived enough life to know what it meant to be wounded, to carry scars no one else could see. He knew how easy it was for people to label someone broken, too far gone, beyond saving. But Max had proven otherwise, and so had Lily. Sometimes all it took was a moment of faith, a pause long enough to let trust grow where fear once lived. In his mind, he replayed a montage of images that had become the story's heart. Families hugging their dogs at the community classes, laughter spilling into the park as children offered treats with, trembling hands, volunteers kneeling in the grass, faces lighting up when anxious strays finally dared to approach. And, most of all, Lily's bright eyes as Max pressed his nose into her palm, a picture of innocence guiding courage. Every piece of it told the same story, that every soul, no matter how scarred or frightened, deserved a chance. He imagined speaking directly to those who had watched the video of the adoption, to the millions who had shared the moment online. His voice was soft but steady, a voice not of authority, but of shared humanity. "Every soul deserves a chance," he would say, his eyes gentle, his expression unguarded. It wasn't a performance. It was truth, carried from a patch of grass in a crowded park to anyone willing to listen. And perhaps, he thought, the real lesson wasn't about dogs alone. It was about people, too. About the way we look at each other, quick to judge, quick to dismiss, unwilling to wait long enough to see what might bloom with patience. If Max could transform from a snarling outcast into a child's protector, then maybe there was hope for every wounded heart. The message was simple, but it carried weight. Healing wasn't about speed. It wasn't about control. It was about faith, the kind that waits, the kind that trusts, the kind that believes in second chances. The images played in his mind like a film, each one sharper than the last. Lily laughing as Max trotted beside her on the sidewalk, his tail wagging freely in the sunshine. Volunteers guiding new families at the park, their voices filled with hope. Children kneeling in the grass, whispering softly to frightened animals until trust began to flicker in their eyes. It wasn't just one story anymore, it was dozens, maybe hundreds, rippling outward from a single moment. The power of it humbled him. He hadn't set out to change anything that day. He had only seen fear in a dog's eyes and chosen to kneel instead of turn away. But that choice had become something larger, something lasting. It proved that gentleness could echo just as loudly as any show of force. He thought about the world beyond those classes and beyond Lily's home. A world often impatient, quick to demand results, quick to discard what didn't shine immediately. Max had been a reminder that the truest transformations took time, that the most beautiful victories were often invisible at first, hidden inside trembling bodies and wary eyes. Patience was not weakness. Faith was not naive. Together, they were the strongest tools anyone could hold. Keanu imagined addressing the people who had watched, the millions who had clicked and shared. He would not lecture them. Instead, he would offer them the same calm he had shown in the grass that day. His gaze would be steady, his tone even. If you ever find yourself doubting someone or yourself, remember Max. Remember that even the most wounded spirit can change when given patience. Every soul deserves a chance. The thought lingered with him, not as a performance, but as a truth he hoped others would carry. The closing images played in his mind like a montage. A little girl wrapping her arms around her dog, volunteers passing on the lessons they had learned, families opening their doors to rescues once dismissed as too broken. Each scene was woven together by one simple thread: compassion. And with that, he left the story in the hands of those who had witnessed it. The ones who would choose whether the lesson stayed in a video or became part of their own lives. For those listening, he left two invitations. The first was simple but piercing. Would you have trusted Max that day? Would you have knelt in the grass, or would you have stepped back? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what you would have done. The second reached deeper. Tell us about a rescue pet or a second chance in your life. Was there a moment when someone or something you believed in transformed before your eyes? Share your story below. It may inspire someone else to take that same leap of faith. He leaned back in his chair, letting the silence settle. Outside, the night stretched wide, full of quiet possibility. He knew the world might not change overnight, but he also knew that change had already begun with one dog, one girl, and a single choice to believe.